He thought returning a jacket would be simple, until she showed up at his door with nothing underneath it. Jake had always been the kind of guy who minded his own business. Living in the busy downtown area for 6 months now, he had settled into a comfortable routine. Every morning he'd grab coffee from the little shop on the ground floor of his building before heading to work. Every evening he'd come home, order dinner, and spend his time reading or watching movies. The coffee shop downstairs had become his second home. The owner, an elderly man named Tony, knew his order by heart: black coffee with 1 sugar. Jake liked the simplicity of it all. No complicated drinks, no fancy names, just good old-fashioned coffee that kept him going through his long days at the office. It was during one of these morning coffee runs that he first noticed her. A young woman who seemed to visit the shop around the same time he did. She always sat at the corner table by the window, typing away on her laptop with a steaming cup next to her. Jake wasn't the type to strike up conversations with strangers, but he found himself curious about what kept her so focused on that screen every single morning. She had this habit of twirling her hair when she was thinking, something Jake noticed during his quick trips to the counter. Sometimes she'd look up from her laptop and stare out the window, as if she was waiting for inspiration to hit her. There was something peaceful about watching someone so lost in their work, though Jake made sure not to stare. He didn't want to come across as creepy or weird. Their first actual interaction happened on a Tuesday morning when the coffee machine broke down. Tony was running around trying to fix it, and the line of customers was getting longer by the minute. Jake watched as the woman at the corner table kept glancing at her phone, clearly worried about being late for something important. Without thinking much about it, Jake walked over to her table. "Excuse me," he said, feeling slightly nervous. "I noticed you keep checking your phone. If you need to get somewhere, there's another coffee place just 2 blocks down the street. They make pretty decent coffee, too." She looked up at him with surprised but grateful eyes. "Oh, thank you so much for telling me. I have an important meeting in an hour, and I really need my morning coffee to function properly." She laughed, and Jake found himself smiling back at her. "No problem at all. I've been there a few times when Tony closes early. It's called Corner Cafe, and their coffee is almost as good as this place." Jake felt proud that he could help someone start their day better. From that day forward, they started exchanging small greetings, a simple good morning or a nod when they saw each other. Jake learned that she was a freelance writer working on various projects, which explained all the typing and thinking he'd witnessed. She seemed like a genuinely nice person, always polite to Tony and never complained when the Wi-Fi was slow or when her usual table was occupied. The weather started getting colder as November rolled around. Jake noticed that she had started wearing thicker sweaters and always carried a large scarf with her. One evening, as he was coming home from a particularly long day at work, he saw her standing outside the building looking frustrated and cold. She was standing next to a small blue car, trying different keys and looking increasingly worried. Jake approached her carefully, not wanting to startle her. "Hey, is everything okay? You look like you're having car troubles." She turned around and he could see that her cheeks were red from the cold wind. "Oh, hi, Jake." He was surprised she knew his name, though he realized Tony probably mentioned it during their morning interactions. "I'm having the worst luck today. I locked my keys inside my car and it's getting so cold out here. I already called a locksmith, but they said it might take an hour or more to get here." Jake looked at her thin jacket and realized she was probably freezing. The November wind was particularly harsh that evening, and he could see her shivering despite trying to hide it. Without hesitation, he took off his leather jacket and offered it to her. "Here, take this. You'll catch a cold standing out here like that." He held out the jacket, but she immediately started shaking her head. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly take your jacket. You'll be cold too, and it looks expensive. What if something happens to it?" She seemed genuinely concerned about accepting his help. "Don't worry about it," Jake insisted, gently placing the jacket over her shoulders. "I'm going inside anyway, so I'll be warm. Plus, this jacket has been through much worse than a little November wind. I'd feel terrible leaving you out here freezing while I'm warm and cozy upstairs." The jacket was clearly too big for her, but she pulled it tight around herself and immediately looked more comfortable. "Thank you so much, Jake. You're really kind to do this for a stranger. I promise I'll return it to you tomorrow. I just need to figure out how to get it back to you." Jake waved his hand dismissively. "Take your time with it. Just drop it off at Tony's whenever you get a chance, or you know where I live now, so no rush at all." The most important thing is that you stay warm until the locksmith arrives. They stood there for a few more minutes, making small talk about work and the weather. Jake found himself enjoying the conversation more than he had expected. She was easy to talk to, with a good sense of humor and interesting stories about her writing projects. When the locksmith finally arrived, Jake made sure she got safely into her car before heading inside. As he watched her drive away, still wearing his leather jacket, Jake felt good about helping someone in need. It reminded him of something his mother always told him growing up, that small acts of kindness could make someone's entire day better. He had no idea that this simple gesture would lead to one of the most surprising and memorable experiences of his life. That night, as Jake got ready for bed, he realized he didn't even know her real name. They had been acquaintances for months, but somehow formal introductions had never happened. He made a mental note to ask her properly when she returned his jacket, thinking it would be nice to finally know what to call his friendly neighbor. Little did Jake know that his leather jacket was about to become the center of a story he would remember for years to come. 3 days had passed since Jake lent his leather jacket to his neighbor, and honestly, he had almost forgotten about it. His life had returned to its normal routine of work, coffee, and quiet evenings at home. He had plenty of other jackets and coats, so the missing leather one hadn't really affected his daily life. If anything, he just hoped she was staying warm during these increasingly cold November nights. Thursday evening started like any other. Jake had come home from work around 6:30, heated up some leftover pizza, and settled down on his couch to catch up on a series he'd been watching. His apartment was cozy and quiet, just the way he liked it after dealing with office noise and traffic all day. The building was usually pretty peaceful in the evenings, with most residents either out for dinner or settled in for the night like himself. Around 9 o'clock, just as Jake was getting really invested in his show, he heard a gentle knock on his door. This immediately caught his attention because he wasn't expecting anyone. His friends usually called or texted before coming over, and delivery guys always buzzed from the front entrance first. Jake paused his show and listened carefully, wondering if maybe he had imagined the sound. The knock came again, a bit more confident this time. Jake got up from his couch, still holding the TV remote in his hand, and walked toward the door. His apartment had one of those security peepholes, so he decided to check who was outside before opening up. Living in a city had taught him to be cautious, especially when it came to unexpected visitors after dark. Looking through the peephole, Jake was surprised to see the woman from the coffee shop standing in the hallway. She was holding what looked like his leather jacket folded neatly in her arms. Her hair was styled differently than usual, and she seemed to be wearing a long, dark coat that he hadn't seen before. Jake felt relieved that she was returning his jacket, though he was curious about why she had decided to bring it to his apartment instead of just leaving it with Tony at the coffee shop. Jake unlocked his door and opened it with a friendly smile. "Hey there! I wasn't expecting to see you tonight. Thanks for bringing my jacket back, though you really didn't have to make a special trip up here." She smiled back, though Jake noticed she seemed a bit nervous, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "Hi, Jake. I hope I'm not bothering you by showing up like this. I got your apartment number from the directory downstairs. I wanted to return your jacket personally and thank you properly for helping me out the other night." "You're not bothering me at all," Jake said, stepping aside slightly. "Would you like to come in for a minute? It seems silly to have this conversation in the hallway, and I was just watching TV anyway. Nothing important." She hesitated for just a moment before stepping into his apartment. Jake noticed she was gripping his jacket pretty tightly, almost like she was nervous about letting it go. He closed the door behind her and gestured toward his living room area. "Can I get you something to drink? Water, soda, or maybe some coffee? I know how much you love your coffee from downstairs." Jake was trying to be a good host, though he still felt a bit curious about why she seemed so fidgety. "No, thank you. I'm fine," she replied, looking around his apartment with interest. "You have a really nice place. It's so clean and organized. Very different from my chaotic writer's mess of an apartment." Jake laughed, feeling a bit proud of his tidy living space. "Thanks, I'm not much of a decorator, but I like keeping things simple and clean. It helps me relax after long days at work. Speaking of work, how's your writing going? Last time we talked, you mentioned working on some interesting projects." As they talked, Jake noticed that she kept glancing toward his couch and then back at him. There was something different about her energy tonight compared to their usual brief morning conversations. She seemed more focused on him, more intentional about being there. It wasn't necessarily uncomfortable, but it was definitely noticeable. The writing is going well, thank you for asking. Actually, your jacket helped me finish one of my biggest projects this week. She held up the leather jacket and smiled. I wore it while working late at night when my apartment got too cold. It kept me warm and somehow made me feel more confident about my work. Jake found this comment a bit odd but sweet at the same time. Well, I'm glad it served you well. That jacket has been with me for a few years now. It's seen me through some cold winters and important meetings. My sister actually gave it to me for Christmas a while back. It smells like your cologne, she said suddenly, then looked a bit embarrassed for making such a personal observation. I mean, not in a weird way. It just reminded me of your kindness every time I wore it. Jake wasn't quite sure how to respond to that comment. He had never really thought about his cologne lingering on clothes, but he supposed it made sense. Oh, well, I hope it wasn't too strong or anything. I usually don't think about those kinds of details. She shook her head quickly. No, it was really nice, actually. Comforting, in a way. It made me realize how thoughtful you were to help a stranger like that. Not many people would give up their jacket for someone they barely know. There was something in the way she said this that made Jake pay closer attention. Her voice had become softer, more meaningful. She was looking directly at him now instead of glancing around the apartment. Jake started to get the feeling that this visit might be about more than just returning his jacket. Well, anyone would have done the same thing, Jake said modestly. You looked freezing out there, and I was going inside anyway. It just seemed like the right thing to do. She took a step closer to him, still holding his jacket but now looking like she had something important to say. Jake, I need to be honest with you about something. This visit isn't just about returning your jacket. There's something I've been wanting to tell you since that night, and I think you deserve to know. Jake felt his heart rate increase slightly. He had no idea what she was about to share, but her serious tone suggested it was something significant. He found himself both curious and nervous about what revelation was coming next. Jake stood there in his living room watching as she clutched his leather jacket and took a deep breath. The atmosphere in the room had suddenly become much more serious than their usual light conversations over morning coffee. He could tell that whatever she was about to share was something she had been thinking about for days. That night when you gave me your jacket, she began, her voice slightly shaky, I wasn't just locked out of my car. I was locked out, but there was more to the story that I didn't tell you. She paused, looking down at the jacket in her hands before meeting his eyes again. Jake nodded encouragingly, though he was starting to feel a bit confused. Okay, what do you mean? What else happened that night? She walked over to his window and looked out at the city lights before turning back to face him. I had been having the worst day imaginable. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. I had missed an important deadline for a client. My laptop crashed and I lost hours of work. And then I got a call from my landlord saying my rent was going up next month. Jake listened carefully, starting to understand why she had seemed so upset that evening. That does sound like a really tough day. I'm sorry you had to deal with all of that. But that's not even the worst part, she continued, her voice getting stronger now that she had started sharing. When I left the coffee shop that night, I was so distracted and stressed that I grabbed the wrong jacket from the rack by the door. I didn't realize it until I got outside and felt how thin it was. This was news to Jake. He had assumed she was just wearing a light jacket, but now he was learning there was more to the story. So the jacket you were wearing wasn't actually yours? Exactly. It belonged to someone else who had left it there, and it was basically just a thin sweater material. No warmth at all. By the time I realized my mistake, the coffee shop was already closed, and I was locked out of my car in freezing weather wearing practically nothing warm. Jake was starting to piece together why she had looked so cold and desperate that night. Wow, so you were really in trouble then. No wonder you looked so relieved when I offered you my jacket. She nodded, but then her expression became more serious again. Jake, when you gave me your jacket that night, you literally saved me from what could have been a dangerous situation. I was starting to feel really weak from the cold, and I had no idea how long I'd have to wait for the locksmith. I'm glad I was there to help, Jake said sincerely, but I still feel like there's something else you want to tell me. You said you needed to be honest about something. She took another deep breath and moved closer to where he was standing. When I got home that night, I was so grateful and so warm in your jacket that I did something I've never done before. I wore your jacket for the rest of the evening while I worked on fixing all the problems from my terrible day. Jake wasn't sure where this was heading, but he could tell it was important to her. Okay, that makes sense. It was a cold night and you needed to stay warm. But here's the thing, Jake, I didn't just wear it over my clothes. I had gotten completely soaked from the rain earlier that day, and all my clothes were damp and uncomfortable. So when I got home, I changed out of everything wet and just wore your jacket while I worked. Jake felt his cheeks getting warm as he began to understand what she was implying. Oh, I see. Well, you needed to get out of wet clothes, so that makes sense. She looked directly at him now, and Jake could see that she was nervous but determined to finish her story. Your jacket was so warm and comfortable, and it smelled like your cologne, which somehow made me feel safe and cared for. I spent the entire night working in just your jacket, and it helped me get through one of the most difficult days I'd had in months. The room became very quiet as Jake processed what she had just shared with him. He wasn't quite sure how to respond to such a personal revelation. Part of him was flattered that his simple act of kindness had meant so much to her, but another part of him felt like this conversation was heading into territory he hadn't expected. I wanted you to know, she continued, because wearing your jacket that night made me realize something about myself. It made me realize that I had been feeling lonely and disconnected from people for a long time, and your kindness reminded me what it felt like to have someone care about me, even in a small way. Jake found himself both touched and slightly overwhelmed by her honesty. I'm really glad I could help you through a difficult time. That's what neighbors should do for each other, right? But she shook her head. It was more than just being neighborly, Jake. The way you gave me your jacket without hesitation, the way you made sure I was okay before going inside, the way you told me not to worry about returning it quickly. All of that showed me that you're genuinely a good person. She paused and looked down at the jacket again. And I know this might sound crazy, but I kept thinking about you while I was wearing it. Not in a weird way, but just grateful thoughts about how rare it is to meet someone who would help a stranger like that. Jake felt his heart beating faster as he realized this conversation was becoming much more personal than he had anticipated. I appreciate you telling me all of this, but I'm not sure I understand what you're trying to say. She smiled nervously and took a step closer to him. What I'm trying to say is that your jacket and your kindness helped me get through more than just one cold night. It helped me remember that there are still good people in the world, and that maybe I don't have to feel so alone all the time. The room felt charged with emotion now, and Jake could see that she was building up to something even more significant. He waited, both curious and nervous about what she might reveal next. Jake, she said softly, I came here tonight not just to return your jacket, but to show you something. To share with you how much your kindness meant to me and to maybe see if that connection I felt was real or just my imagination. As she spoke these words, Jake noticed that she had started to unbutton her long coat, and his mind began racing as he wondered what exactly she was about to show him. Jake watched in complete shock as she began unbuttoning her coat. His mind was racing, trying to process what was happening and figure out how to handle this unexpected situation. He had been prepared for a simple jacket return, maybe a brief chat about the weather or her writing projects, but this was definitely not what he had expected for a Thursday evening. Wait, Jake said quickly, raising his hand gently. I think maybe we should slow down here for a second. He could see that she had already unbuttoned the top few buttons of her coat, and he was starting to feel very uncomfortable with the direction things were heading. She paused, looking at him with a mixture of confusion and disappointment. Jake, I thought you would understand. I'm trying to show you how much your kindness meant to me that night. I want to recreate that moment when your jacket was the only thing keeping me warm and safe. Jake took a deep breath, realizing he needed to handle this situation very carefully. He didn't want to hurt her feelings or make her feel embarrassed, but he also knew that this wasn't the right way for things to go. Listen, I really appreciate you sharing your story with me, and I'm honestly touched that helping you that night made such a difference in your day. He walked over to his couch and sat down, hoping to create a more calm and comfortable atmosphere for the conversation they needed to have. But I think maybe there's been a misunderstanding about what happened between us and what it meant. She stopped unbuttoning her coat and looked at him with growing embarrassment. Oh no, did I completely misread the situation? You were so kind to me and I felt like there was a connection between us during our coffee shop conversations. Jake patted the couch cushion next to him, inviting her to sit down so they could talk properly. There's definitely a connection between us, but I think we might have different ideas about what kind of connection it is. Can you sit down so we can talk about this? She buttoned her coat back up and came over to sit on the opposite end of his couch, clearly feeling awkward about what had just happened. Jake could see that she was starting to realize that her bold gesture hadn't been received the way she had hoped. "I'm so embarrassed," she said, covering her face with her hands. "I can't believe I just did that. You must think I'm completely crazy or inappropriate." Jake shook his head firmly. "I don't think you're crazy at all. I think you're someone who was going through a really tough time, and my small act of kindness meant more to you than I realized. There's nothing wrong with feeling grateful or wanting to express that gratitude." She looked up at him through her fingers. "But I completely misunderstood what you were thinking, didn't I? You were just being a good neighbor and I turned it into something romantic in my head." "Here's the thing," Jake said thoughtfully. "I do think you're a really interesting person. Our morning conversations at the coffee shop are always the best part of my day, and I've been curious about getting to know you better. But I think we should get to know each other as friends first in normal everyday situations." She nodded slowly, starting to understand his perspective. "You mean like actual dates where we both have clothes on and talk about normal things like regular people do?" Jake couldn't help but laugh at her comment, and he was relieved to see that she was starting to see the humor in the situation too. "Exactly like that. Maybe we could start with something simple, like having dinner together or going to see a movie. You know, the kind of thing where we both stay fully dressed the entire time." "I feel like such an idiot," she said, but she was smiling now instead of looking mortified. "I spent 3 days planning this whole dramatic gesture, and I never stopped to think about whether it was something you would actually want." Jake moved a little closer to her on the couch, wanting to make sure she understood that he wasn't rejecting her as a person. "You're not an idiot at all. You're someone who took a chance and put yourself out there, which actually takes a lot of courage. I respect that, even if I think we should approach getting to know each other differently." She looked at him with genuine curiosity. "So you're not completely freaked out by what I just tried to do? You don't think I'm some kind of weird person who can't handle normal social interactions?" "Not at all," Jake assured her. "I think you're someone who got caught up in a moment of gratitude and maybe let your imagination run away with you a bit. We've all done things like that in different ways. The important thing is that we can talk about it and figure out a better way to move forward." She picked up his leather jacket from where she had set it down on the coffee table. "I suppose I should give this back to you now and pretend this whole evening never happened." Jake shook his head and gently pushed the jacket back toward her. "Actually, why don't you keep it for another few days? But this time wear it on a proper date with me, somewhere public, where we're both fully clothed and getting to know each other like normal adults do." Her face lit up with genuine excitement. "Are you asking me out on a real date, Jake? Like dinner and conversation and maybe holding hands if things go well?" "That's exactly what I'm asking," Jake confirmed. "How about Saturday evening? There's a nice Italian restaurant a few blocks from here. We could have dinner, talk about your writing, and I could tell you about my boring office job. Very traditional, very normal, very clothed." She laughed and hugged his jacket to her chest. "That sounds absolutely perfect. And Jake, thank you for handling this whole situation so gracefully. A lot of guys would have either taken advantage of what I was offering or made me feel terrible about it." Jake stood up and walked toward his door, indicating that their evening was coming to a natural end. "I think when you really care about someone, you want to get to know them properly. And I have a feeling that the real you, the one I talked to over morning coffee, is much more interesting than any dramatic gesture could ever be." As she prepared to leave, she turned back to him one more time. "Jake, can I ask you something? What made you realize that what I was doing wasn't what you wanted?" Jake thought about this for a moment. "I guess I realized that the person I'm interested in getting to know is the writer who sits by the window every morning, not someone trying to be someone else to impress me. I want to know the real you, not a performance." She smiled and headed toward the door. "Well then, you'll definitely get to meet the real me on Saturday. And I promise no dramatic gestures or surprise revelations. Just good food, good conversation, and normal dating behavior." As Jake closed the door behind her, he realized that this awkward evening had actually turned into something much better than either of them had planned. After she left that night, Jake stood in his living room for several minutes just trying to process everything that had happened. He looked around his apartment, which suddenly felt different somehow, as if the evening's events had changed the energy of the space entirely. The whole situation had been so unexpected, so far from anything he could have imagined when he first heard that knock on his door. Jake walked over to his window and looked down at the street below. He could see her walking toward her car, still wearing that long coat and carrying herself with what looked like a mixture of embarrassment and relief. He found himself smiling as he watched her get into her car and drive away. Despite how awkward things had gotten, he was genuinely looking forward to their dinner date on Saturday. The next morning, Jake's routine felt completely different. When he went down to the coffee shop, he found himself looking around for her, wondering if she would show up for her usual morning writing session. Part of him was curious about how their interaction would be after everything that had happened the night before. Tony, the coffee shop owner, greeted him with his usual friendly smile. "The regular black coffee with 1 sugar?" he asked, already reaching for a cup. "Actually, Tony," Jake said, surprising himself, "make that 2 coffees today, and add one of those fancy vanilla drinks that the writer lady usually orders." Tony raised an eyebrow with interest. "Oh, finally making a move on the pretty writer, are we? I was wondering when you two would start talking to each other properly." "You've been doing this awkward dance for months." Jake laughed, realizing that their shy morning greetings had been obvious to everyone except themselves. "Something like that. We're going out to dinner this weekend, actually." "Good for you," Tony said, preparing both drinks with obvious approval. "She's a nice girl. Always polite, always tips well, and she helped me fix my computer last month when it was giving me trouble. You picked a good one." When she walked into the coffee shop 20 minutes later, Jake was sitting at a table near the counter, both drinks waiting. She spotted him immediately, and seemed to hesitate for just a moment before walking over with a shy smile. "Good morning, Jake," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me this morning after my dramatic performance last night." Jake pushed the vanilla drink toward her. "I figured we should practice having a normal conversation before our date tomorrow. Plus, I realized I never properly learned your name. We've been neighbors and coffee shop acquaintances for months, but we skipped right over basic introductions." She picked up her drink and took a sip, looking pleasantly surprised. "You remembered my usual order. That's really sweet of you. And you're right about the name thing. I'm Lisa, by the way. Lisa Chen. I should have introduced myself properly months ago." "Nice to officially meet you, Lisa," Jake said, extending his hand for a formal handshake. "I'm Jake Morrison, and I work in accounting for a construction company about 10 minutes from here." They shook hands and both started, laughing at the absurdity of introducing themselves so formally after everything they had shared the night before. "This is much better," Lisa said, settling back in her chair. "Normal conversation, clothes on, no dramatic revelations about leather jackets. I could get used to this." Over the next hour, they had the kind of conversation Jake had been hoping for all along. Lisa told him about her freelance writing career, her dreams of publishing a novel someday, and her ongoing battle with her temperamental laptop. Jake shared stories about his coworkers, his weekend hiking hobby, and his secret talent for making really good pancakes. "You know," Lisa said as they finished their coffee, "I spent so much time thinking about that dramatic gesture that I never just tried talking to you like a normal person. This is so much better than anything I had planned." Jake nodded in agreement. "I think sometimes we build things up in our heads so much that we forget simple approaches are usually the best ones. Like just asking someone if they want to have coffee and get to know each other." As they prepared to leave for their respective workdays, Lisa turned to him with a genuine smile. "Jake, thank you for handling everything so well last night. And thank you for giving me a chance to show you who I really am instead of just writing me off as that crazy woman who showed up at your door." "Everyone deserves a second chance to make a first impression," Jake replied. "Besides, I had a feeling the real you would be worth getting to know." Saturday evening arrived and Jake found himself more nervous than he had expected. He chose a simple button-down shirt and dark jeans, wanting to look nice but not overdressed for their neighborhood Italian restaurant. When he knocked on Lisa's apartment door at 7 o'clock, she answered wearing a pretty blue dress and carrying a small purse, looking much more like the confident writer he had observed from afar than the nervous woman from Thursday night. "You look really nice," Jake said, offering her his arm as they walked toward the elevator. "Thank you. I decided to go with the classic approach tonight. No surprises, no dramatic gestures, just a normal date with a nice guy," Lisa replied, and Jake could hear the relief in her voice. Dinner was everything Jake had hoped it would be. They talked about books, travel dreams, childhood memories, and career goals. Lisa was funny and intelligent, with interesting opinions about everything from coffee shop politics to city planning. Jake found himself completely engaged in their conversation, forgetting to check his phone or worry about what to say next. "I have a confession," Lisa said as they shared a dessert. "I've been watching you at the coffee shop for months, trying to work up the courage to start a real conversation. I always thought you seemed like someone I'd like to know better." Jake nearly choked on his bite of tiramisu. "Are you serious?" "I've been doing the exact same thing. I used to time my coffee runs hoping I'd see you there." They both started laughing, realizing they had been mutual admirers all along, both too shy to make the first move under normal circumstances. As they walked back to their building that evening, Jake felt a sense of contentment he hadn't experienced in a long time. "Lisa, would you like to do this again next weekend? Maybe try that new Mexican place that opened up across town?" "I'd love that," Lisa replied. "But next time I'm buying. It's the least I can do after putting you through such an interesting week." When they reached Lisa's apartment door, there was a moment of uncertainty about how to end the evening. Jake solved it by giving her a gentle hug and a quick kiss on the cheek. "Thank you for a perfect evening," he said. "This is exactly how I hoped getting to know you would be." As Jake headed up to his own apartment, he realized that sometimes the best relationships come from the most unexpected beginnings. His leather jacket had started a chain of events that led to finding someone special, even if the path had been more complicated than he ever could have imagined. The leather jacket, meanwhile, had found its permanent home in Lisa's closet, where it served as a reminder that acts of kindness, good communication, and second chances can lead to beautiful new beginnings.